Spirit, be my wisdom, be my words, lift me up. Spirit, grow inside me, keep me yours, help me love.
He didn't talk about it a whole lot. He wouldn't talk about his past too much, but he was one of, I think, 7 children, the oldest boy, and raised in New York. His father was a Monsignor in a Greek Orthodox church there. But in that, he had experienced a lot of, he would say, hypocrisy, things that he saw and things that happened, and had really alienated him from the church at a very young age, things that he had experienced. And at 15, he got married. I can't even imagine. 15? Yes. And he had 2 children, 2 girls, and joined the Marines at 17, lied about his age to get in the Marines, and left to war. And like I said, he always gave everything, no matter what he was doing. And the same with the Marines. He became, well, he went to Japan, Okinawa. He was bodyguard to the general. He was like a 20-year-old, I'd say boy, but man, obviously, experiencing things that, you know, you experience in war, and eventually being decorated. He got the Silver Star for protecting and taking a hill by himself and all kinds of things, which he didn't talk about at all. And we had his medals, but later in life, he had had a stroke in '85 and couldn't talk real well, but at one time, he drew me pictures of what happened in the war and how it happened. And I don't know quite what inspired him to do that, but if it was partially therapy for him, but just to kind of let me know. And he always regretted it. He had a hard time reconciling the people that he killed in war with his new Christian faith, even though, you know, he knew war was justified in the Word. He didn't like the fact that he had done it, and done it with zeal, I must say. I mean, when he was going to be a soldier, he was going to be the best. And, you know, he was in many ways. And so when he came home after that, that marriage failed, and then he met and married my mother. Had 2 girls, my sister and myself, and that marriage failed pretty immediately after I was born. And then he met my stepmom, and they had actually lived together a long time before they got married, because my mother wouldn't divorce him. I mean, it was all very convoluted. She was Catholic and didn't want a divorce, but eventually she agreed. And he had married my stepmom, and they had 5 children together, and that's where I was, you know, really integrated into their family and life. And so through all that, he struggled with so many things. You know, he was very successful. He came to Santa Fe and opened a gallery back in the 60s, and was a successful art dealer in real estate, and, you know, enjoyed all that and traveled and promoted art in New York and over in Europe. He went several times, and but, you know, had that unfulfilled part of him, and still that kind of yearning for what was missing. And so, you know, when he got saved during, I think it was like the summer of '69, you know, as he jumped into that with Faithway House and everything, he had become very legalistic and very rigid over the, you know, the next several years after that, and really keeping the law, being very stringent in how people dressed and acted. And it just kind of gotten into that in such a severe way that it started alienating people later on in the 80s and 90s. And he'd gone from this amazing time of the Jesus movement to really alienating himself and his family. And then he had an episode in the grocery store here at Albertsons where he was with his wife shopping, and he started feeling weak, and he kind of fell into the milk section. That's when they had it kind of open back then. It wasn't in the doors. And he fell in there and he was having a stroke, and they called an ambulance. At that time, we weren't close at that time because we had started going to church, and he thought we were all gonna die and go to hell because we were going to an organized church at that point. And so he quit talking to us, which is amazing things. We've been so close. So he went to the hospital, and my stepmother called me and said, you know, your dad's in the hospital. So my husband, Ron, and a couple other guys, Pat Coughlin, and it might have been Jim Noble, they all rushed to the hospital. This was pretty interesting. My dad was in the bed. He couldn't move his right side. He couldn't speak or anything. And the doctor had left the room, and those men stood around him and started praying for his healing. And as they were praying, he started moving his arm, he started speaking, and the doctor came in there and was just amazed and like, what'd you guys do? What happened here? And they told him, and the doctor actually wrote in the hospital medical report that my dad had had a stroke, paralyzed and aphasia or whatever, and that 3 men came in and prayed and he was immediately healed. It said in the report. And there was no explanation for it, other explanation. So my dad went home, and so that had kind of started this reconnect in a great way. This was in 1985, I think. And I think he started questioning, you know, his really kind of a disdain for the organized church and wondering what, you know, maybe the church does have some validity. And so he kind of would call us and talk to us about things, you know, trying to ease in. And then he had another stroke about 2 years later that he wasn't able to speak after that very well. The only word he could say right after the stroke was God and Jesus, and then he built on that over the years. But right after that, his finances failed, he lost his home, his wife left him, and he had had this stroke. It was really kind of a Job situation. And my husband and I went and got him out of his home and brought him to our home. And he started coming to church. And he was very hesitant, but that's when we were at Capital Christian, and we had the pews, and the church was kind of, the floor was on an angle like a theater. So you would walk forward at an angle. And when we'd have communion or time of prayer, he'd always want to go up. And he'd get out of the pew and start walking and start kind of falling. His legs would start going out from under him. And as I said, my dad was a very proud man of his accomplishment. So I'd watch that and know that something was happening that he couldn't control or explain. And by the time he'd get up front, he'd basically be on the floor. And he would be very embarrassed. And he'd get up and come back and just say, how come? No. And very embarrassed about it. But every week he'd go up again. And so this went on for several weeks, and God was just doing amazing work in his heart. And after that, he met another older man at the church, Jack Mahoney, that really, they just became best friends. And Jack was a strong believer, and they became prayer partners. And at that time, you know, my dad just threw caution to the wind and just really embraced the Holy Spirit and everything God was doing. And really, you know, when I think about my dad, he lived almost 2 different Christian lives, kind of before stroke and after stroke, and both were good and had their merit. And yet his second half, he became this tender, soft, ultra-forgiving, non-judgmental kind of guy where everybody was acceptable and really a mouthpiece for the Lord. Everywhere we went in town, he would witness, to the point that I would get embarrassed. And then I felt bad because I was embarrassed. And yet we'd be in the line at the grocery store, a restaurant, nobody went unnoticed by him. And even in his inability to speak well, he would be able to share the message. And he didn't care anymore, you know, at that point. He just really, you know, embraced everything up until the time, you know, that he died in 2004, went to be with the Lord, and up until that very day, you know, even in the hospital, he witnessed to the doctors and nurses, and he was just so faithful, you know, really throughout his whole life, anything that he was given to do. And yet the change in him was really astronomical, probably more than anybody else I've seen in my life, seen that change life in a person.
Give us your comments. We want to know what you think. So drop one in the comment section below. And if you like this video, please like and subscribe. And until next time, God bless.